on Inside the Investigations. For years, Texas state agencies have built do not hire registries meant to warn employers about prospective job candidates who have histories of misconduct.
KXAN investigative reporter Kelly Wiley explains how despite internal records documenting red flags, the information is sometimes not available to those who need to hear it most.
There's a failure here, no question.
And good morning to everybody out there. Thanks so much for joining us here on KXAN Live. I'm Will Dupree coming to you from the KXAN Live studio. We are bringing you yet another edition of Inside the Investigations. This is where we break down some of the big stories our Investigates team has reported during the last week. And today we are joined by investigative reporter Kelly Wiley, who has been joining us for the last few months. And today, Kelly, we're talking about your story that you reported.
Yes, it's always fun when I get to talk about my own work.
Yeah, right. I mean, because you put so much into it. And this one is really fascinating because you've been following this story for quite a while. So it involves a series of investigations about schools hiring people with a history of misconduct. You found out a pretty big development in this story. So what was that?
So to explain the development, we kind of have to start from the beginning. Right before the new year, Austin ISD, which is the largest school district in our area, sent an email to parents. It was on December 8th. And it was saying, they sent it to Aiken's high school parents specifically, saying that their police department had arrested one of its tutors. And I should point out, this tutor didn't work directly for the school, although he was assigned to Aiken's campus. He was actually a contractor with a nonprofit called Austin Partners in Education. They staff tutors at campuses across the district. But for more than a month, he had been tutoring on Aiken's campus. And according to police, they arrested him because a student who he tutored reported to his mom and police that this man, Isaiah Smith, touched him inappropriately. And the school district had been investigating him for months before they arrested him. During that time, he had been banned from campus. But in December, police felt they had enough to arrest him for injury to a student by contact. But what parents did not know at the time was that Isaiah Smith was also being investigated in another part of Texas for a very similar allegation. In fact, he'd been under investigation by another state agency when he was hired to start working as a tutor for Austin ISD.
So this is so much information that you're able to connect these two different investigations that are happening. So how did you find out about that?
You know, I've looked back on how did we figure this out, and it was actually a very weird way. Back in August 2002, our political reporter, Monica Madden, was working on a report. She was at the Capitol, and this report she was working on was about the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, and she interviewed Isaiah Smith then. And we were all kind of in the newsroom thinking, we've seen this person's face before. And it was because we'd seen her interview him. He had testified that day before a committee about issues he felt occurred during his time as a volunteer at Giddings State School, which, if you're not familiar, that's one of the detention centers that TJJD has oversight over. It's one of the detention centers they run. And in that interview, he said he was actually going to start working at Giddings as a full-time juvenile corrections officer that next week. So after learning about his arrest over the Aikens allegations, we checked with TJJD. We wanted to know, A, did he actually work there at the time that he was alleging to have worked there? And B, were there any issues that popped up during his tenure there?
And this is video that we were just showing you of Isaiah Smith testifying at a state Capitol committee meeting that Kelly just mentioned. Kelly, what did the Texas Juvenile Justice Department say to you whenever you asked those questions?
Well, first, the agency confirmed he worked there in August 2002. That's the truth. He would become a juvenile corrections officer right when he said. But they also told us he was fired that next month. He'd only worked there for a very short period of time. TJJD said they fired him after a juvenile who had been living at Giddings State School reported that Smith touched him inappropriately. The agency had started investigating this issue while reviewing video footage for that they started investigating. They were reviewing video footage, and he was actually fired because he turned off his body camera. And they realized that during that investigation. But turning off your body camera at a juvenile facility is a fireable offense, according to TJJD. But more importantly, TJJD said they immediately flagged him in their database. It's called ICIS. And this flag basically told any juvenile county facility in the state, hey, call us before you're hiring him because we're investigating him over a sexual misconduct allegation.
So the Texas Juvenile Justice Department flagged him in their database, this hiring database that people can check. So why did Austin ISD or Austin Partners in Education not call that state agency when they were considering hiring him and bringing him on?
Right. That was the first thing that we were wondering on our investigative team is if they had been investigating him, how did he end up in another education setting as a tutor? So the first thing that you should know is we don't know that Austin Partners in Education or Austin ISD didn't call TJJD. Austin Partners in Investigation Partners in Education, because there's an ongoing investigation, they've declined to answer a lot of our questions around what they did. However, we did find out that TJJD's database, ICIS, where they put this flag saying, call us because there's something you need to know about this person's past, that database is not accessible to nonprofits like Austin Partners in Education. It's not accessible to the Texas Education Agency that has oversight over schools, and it's not as accessible to public or private schools. The only people that have access to that database are other juvenile county facilities and the state agency, TJJD. So the only people who would have been able to just log on and immediately see that flag are those facilities who arguably do need to know that information. But the thing here is, if Isaiah Smith told APIE or Austin ISD, hey, I did work there, they probably would have had a reason to call. There would have been reasonable to think that they would have made a call, and TJJD let us know we would have told them about that same flag. But let's say he didn't put that on his resume. And again, Austin Partners in Education won't confirm to us either way because this is under investigation. They really would have no way of knowing to even make that call. They would have no access to that database that would tell them that there was an issue.
So really this exposes some loopholes and potential gaps in background check systems that hiring would affect.
Absolutely. We thought so too. We actually, after doing this story, called lawmakers. The first person we called was Senator Paul Beton. He passed a bill in 2017 that would have required TEA, which is that education oversight group for the state, to create a do not hire registry. He also supported other legislation in the past that would have required superintendents to report alleged misconduct to the state. So we really wanted to know what he thought because he had a vested interest and history of trying to make it so that school districts had all the information they possibly could before making these hires. His reaction was actually to send a letter to TEA and to TJJD asking how something like this could happen. He specifically brought up existing laws that he thought actually should have prevented this.
What are some of those laws exactly?
Well, there was a lot going on during last regular session. I know you more than anyone know that as a politics reporter. I think if we think what was going on in regards to education in the legislature, I mean, you would say school vouchers, you would say school funding, but actually a pretty important bill, Senate Bill 1849, was passed during regular session. It was signed by the governor, and this would have required a huge search engine to be built. So what you should know is all of these state agencies that have some sort of hand in education settings, think HHSC, think TEA, TJJD, and DFPS, they all have some version of a do not hire registry, where they catalog and keep track of misconduct by employees, and not criminal misconduct always. Sometimes it's an administrative thing. So there's a policy that says they're not supposed to do something and they did that thing. And so we're tracking that here. And this bill required all of those state agencies to bring all that data together in one large search engine that they would all have access to. So let's say what happened, the allegation that was made at TJJD against Isaiah Smith, it would get put into that big database. So anyone from any of those agencies could have seen that flag in that data. He is right in that they'd already kind of thought of that issue and it built legislation, passed legislation, and had it signed by the governor.
And we don't know yet when that will be relaunching. Is that right?
That's the problem. So when Senator Betancourt got that letter back from TEA and TJJD, the heads of those agencies, number one, flagged that this database is not finished yet. They're all working on it. The Department of Information Resources is actually the one tasked with building that database, but it's not finished yet. It's been more than 6 months since that legislation was signed, came into effect. And to be frank, it's a large undertaking and it's not finished yet. But more importantly, you've got a legislature that is recognized. This is a huge problem that every agency isn't able to see documented infractions, misconduct. And then you've got this database that's going to not be finished probably until the end of 2024, and that's being generous. And you've got all this in between where schools have to continue running, they have to continue hiring people. Nonprofits that help staff schools have to continue running and they have to continue hiring people, and not much has changed in the interim to account for this problem that we already know exists.
So I would imagine that's pretty disappointing for some of the lawmakers that were involved with these reforms. Now, circling back, though, to State Senator Paul Betancourt's letter that he sent to the TEA and the Juvenile Justice Department, he asked them some questions. Did those agencies provide any answers to those? Yeah,
so one of the questions that he had, obviously TJJD flagged Smith when they started investigating him. But he also was curious why, like I mentioned, TEA has its own do not hire registry, why he wasn't being listed as being under investigation under that do not hire registry that TEA has. And the answer to that question is really what Senator Betancourt is now focused on. Education Commissioner Mike Morath, who heads TEA, wrote back and actually flagged another gap in the system. He said that Isaiah Smith is a contractor. Remember, he didn't work directly for the school district. He was assigned to their campus, but he technically worked for Austin Partners in Education. And TEA pointed out they do not have the authority to investigate contractors who are accused of misconduct on a school campus. They also can't compel or make school districts report contractors who are accused of misconduct. And further, school districts are not required to report contractors who get in trouble or who are accused of misconduct. So, Austin ISD had never reported Smith to TEA, and if he had, they wouldn't have been able to investigate that matter to put him on a do not hire registry. So Senator Betancourt, that soundbite that you heard from him and that opened up to our talk today, when he said there's a failure here, he also mentioned that there are gaps that still need to be closed. He called it plugging holes. He said since 2017, he'd been trying to plug holes that allowed for people that maybe shouldn't be in education settings to get there, to fall through the cracks. And he says as soon as they get back into session, he plans to introduce legislation that would make it so that TEA could actually investigate contractors and put them on their do not hire registry.
Well, certainly this story is not going to be ending anytime soon, because we know that there will be some proposals potentially introduced maybe even at the end of this year when the bill filing becomes open to the state lawmakers. And Senator Betancourt has been there for quite some time, so I know that you'll be tracking this very closely, Kelly.
Yes, it's always, I think, interesting to see when lawmakers watch our investigations and immediately see solutions that are possible. It's great for me career-wise in affirming when we see that our investigations can have an impact. And I'll be very curious to see how it's received when he authors this new legislation.
And we will have another conversation at that time when it does. So Kelly Wiley, thank you again for joining us, as always, but for focusing on this story that really could see some big changes for the state. We appreciate it. All right, everybody, that is Kelly Wiley, and I am Will Dupree. This is our latest edition of Inside the Investigations. We'll be back next Wednesday with another look at one of the great stories that our team here is doing. So join us then. We'll see you later. Have a good day, everybody. Take care.